Welcome to Broken World Entertainment and a review of episode 1 of The Rings of Power. And oh boy, it's bad. Very, very bad. Especially when you've just come off watching The Fellowship of the Rings. I literally watched The Fellowship of the Rings and jumped straight into episode 1 of this abomination of the works of Tolkien. Oh. Well, where do we start with this? So, it opens with young Galadriel, who's making some sort of paper boat. There's a bunch of other kids watching her and they start bullying her. Oh. She gets all upset and angry because they sink her little boat, which turns into kind of a swan looking thing or something, like origami. She goes nuts and then she has a talk with her brother. The brother who goes off and dies. I'm gonna be skipping over a few bits of this probably because I just don't really want to take forever to get through. But we have her as the young kid, which we then jump immediately to her brother in battle against orcs. They're not fighting Sauron at this point. They're fighting his master. And he gets killed. They all get killed. Then we get the scene of Galadriel putting the helmets onto the big pile of helmets. And the idea of this is that they've never known death until now. This is where it gets really annoying because you're like, whoa, what a tonal jump. You go from this immediately to meeting the Harfoots, aka the Hobbits. Yep, you go from this story of tragedy of her brother dying. Of course, you get the funeral thing where she takes the knife out of his hands, sees the mark of Sauron on him. It says she's now taking his mission. But then we go straight to the Harfoots, where we meet Lenny Henry's character, and we meet what's her excuse me, Elenor Brandyfoot. The accents of these hobbits, Harfoots, whatever, is ridiculous. They jump between like a Yorkshire accent to a very posh British accent, oh hello, and then to an Irish accent, but not a normal Irish accent. No, the Hollywood Irish accent. The top of the morning to you. Oh, where's me Lucky Charms? And it's just so stupid. By the way, here's the mad thing about Elenor. Her father, so she's white, her father's white, but her mother is black. At least I'm pretty sure she's meant to be her mother. Yeah, I'm just looking at the cat. Yes, she's her mother. But she's black. How did that work? By the way, it's straight away, when it jumps away from the Galadriel and to you meeting the Harf, it immediately makes sure that you know there's black people in this show. I mean, right away. So you're there, and all of a sudden it jumps from them back to Galadriel, meeting Elrond, and they start having a conversation. And by the way, Galadriel in this is a total bitch. She's just me. Oh yeah, that's the one thing I forgot with the beginning. Is her traveling with her army looking for Sauron. She's in search for Sauron. They're traveling great planes. Apparently they've been out there for, they hint at years. So you get that scene of them climbing the side of the mountain with the ice. They get to the top of that. They go walking through a storm. They're looking for where the last sighting of orcs was. They're walking through a storm. One of them falls at the back. You've seen this in the trailer. By the way, everything you've seen in the trailer is in the first episode. The guy at the back says, "Hey, Galadriel, stop." And she's like, "No, we gotta keep going." You're like, what a bitch. You know? But they call her again and she eventually stops and they realise, oh, we're here, and yada yada yada, and they end up fighting the big, what they call snow troll. And the snow troll kicks the shit out of everyone until Galadriel jumps in, and she's another Rey Skywalker. She's jumping all over the place. The very first thing she does is that stupid scene that you saw that got released on Twitter, where the dude puts the sword down and she jumps on the blade and he launches her. It looks even worse than it did when it got leaked, that part. And that's the thing, once they defeat this troll, she's like, right, we continue, we gotta leave. And our whole army, which is basically all dudes, went, yeah, well, you're going on your own, and put their swords down and left her. So she went off on her own, which is then when we get the tonal jump from that to the bleeding hobbits. And then that jumps back to Galadriel meeting up with Elrond, and she's demanding an audience with the king. So he basically tells her, I'll get you a meeting with him after a ceremony. They're getting rewarded basically for their efforts. Then we get, by the way, when this is all it keeps jumping from them to the Harfoot. So once he says that, it immediately jumps back to the Harfoots, and Eleanor's having a conversation with her mother, and it's just a nothing conversation. Eleanor snuck off to a different area that they shouldn't have gone, and she was taking berries, and starts giving her mom and dad berries, and it's like, ooh. Then we jump back to Galadriel with the king giving a speech, and he's putting these crowns on her head, and all these other warriors who don't know where these guys came from, but all of a sudden there's all these other warriors. They're all elves, by the way, and they're all in this crazy armor. They must have the smallest necks known to man, because the armor wraps around their necks and it's super skinny. But of course she's up front, but she's elevated in a way where she's kneeling that she pretty much towers over everyone else that's behind her, which I thought was funny. And she kind of reluctantly takes the crown that the king is offering, because he's saying this has been offered now that war is over. We're now officially in a time of peace. And she's hell bent on revenge and getting Sauron. So she's like, obviously, we don't want peace. Once that scene ends, we jump to meeting our two activists of the cast, the Brownie or whatever way you pronounce her name, and what's his name, Aronda or something like that. I can't remember. The Ismael Cruz character dude, the Black Elf, basically. Him and one other elf arrive to this little kind of village. He goes into, he leaves the other dude. He's just like, yeah, good luck. He goes into basically a bar, a tavern. There's a young guy sitting there with a haircut of a TikToker. And the bar fella is telling him, oh, some blokes up the ways, grass was poisoned, you know, the grass is dying, but he's not really listening, because guess who's behind him? Yeah, our other activist, Nazani, that's her actual name. That one, what is she, Israeli or Iranian? The Iranian activist. He's watching her and she walks out and he's like, my well is always open to you. And he's like, what about the poison? What are you talking about poison? He says, you were just talking about poison. He's, oh yeah, your man's grass died. And he wants to know where. TikTok haircut dude jumps up and he starts telling them they don't want him there and so, and he actually says, talk about on the nose for, hey, it's a black elf. He says, we don't want and like your kind. It's like, oh, bit on the nose. So with that, we jump back to not Galadriel this time, but to Elrond with the king. They're having a conversation about, is Sauron back and whatnot. Then it does go to Elrond and Galadriel, and you get that scene where you saw in the trailer of the conversation to put your sword down. She's saying, you haven't seen what I've seen. By the way, she's seen nothing. So when she's like, you haven't seen what I've seen, he's like, I've seen my share. Yeah, you have not seen what I have seen. It's like, you've seen nothing. That's it, literally, you've seen nothing. Then it jumps back to our forbidden love, where he's being told that the king has announced peace, so they are no longer required to be where they are. I think he said he's been there 79 years. I'm pretty sure that's what he said. And of course he goes to see her, and so you meet her and her son, Theo. It was just a bit of an obnoxious little dickhead, to be honest. Oh, she gives him when he's back at the bar, he follows her out after his little run-in with the "you're not welcome here." She gives him this little vial and he opens it. Talk about bad editing and camera work. He pours whatever's meant to be in it. He tells you it's meant to be a seed. Clearly his hand is meant to be in a position where you can see what came out into his hand. It didn't catch it. You do not see what goes into his hand, which is why you are now relying on hearing him say what the hell's in his hand, because you're like, yeah, cameraman did not know where to put that camera. So we're meeting Theo now, and they see Ismael's character coming down to the house. She seems to be a medicine woman or of some sort. So he's like, oh, what's one of them doing here? Literally, he says, what's one of them doing here? She goes out and says, I thought you were leaving. We are. All of a sudden the son comes out and says, "Ma, there's a man here to see you." And you're like, yeah, she's like talking to him. What are you talking about? There's a man here. She goes back in, which you obviously now think was that not her door into her house? No, she goes in, goes to the side, and there's another door. There's one of the dudes with a cow and something wrong with the cow. All of a sudden, elf boy comes around and he's like, did the animal graze? He's kind of patting it down. She's looking it over, saying there's no scabs, no injuries, no signs of disease. And Black Elf, Don Lemon we shall call him, because that's what everyone else has been calling him, milks it, but all this black shit comes out. And they ask, where did this happen? And the guy says somewhere far east, I think it was. So he's like, okay, I'm gonna check that out. And she immediately's like, yeah, I'm coming with you. It was like, never says anything to the son, nothing. It's just like, yep, I'm coming with you. They naff off. Back to Gladriel and Elrond and stuff, and the king telling them that they're going to be sent home to the far west, I think it is, or somewhere north or far west, somewhere, I can't really remember, but they're returning home, basically where they've come from, where the elves actually come from. She's not happy about that and all that stuff. They're put onto a boat that's out now in the middle of the goddamn ocean. Her and all the men in this, the armor stuff, they're just standing there holding swords. And there's all these kind of women in these weird veils kind of things that eventually come and start taking the swords off them, then taking the armor off them. But they go to take Gladriel's knife, the brother's knife, and she won't let go of it. And one of the guys beside her starts staring at her, so she lets go. But later on, like when they arrive to where they're meant to be going, all of a sudden the clouds kind of part and there's a big light. And they're going to be going into the light. She turns around and looks down beside her on the floor, and there's the knife, and you're like, oh, that was very handy and nice of the servant woman there to just willy-nilly leave the knife right there for her to get. We jump back to Theo and the haircut dude from the bar, basically. In a barn, he takes out the hilt of a broken sword, which I think is meant to be Sauron's sword. Then it pretty much jumps back and forth from here to the boat with Gladriel. Then we go back to the Harfoots, and Leonard Henry's reading a book and he's talking about the sky doesn't look right. Elnor asks him, like, hey, what is it? And he's like, the skies are strange. Then we jump to the Forbidden Romance. They just have a conversation, nothing really happens with that. Then we go back to Gladriel on the boat. They're not talking on the boat, by the way. The clouds have opened, things open, she's seen the thing. Guy walks up to the front of the boat. By the way, at one stage they kind of all start singing, except her, which was just weird. After these weird birds come flying down, which sound like a kettle boiling. I shit you not. The guy beside her puts his hand out and says, take my hand, and she puts her hand out to his, but she keeps turning back and looking. Basically, she doesn't go with them, This bitch gets the knife and jumps into the middle of the goddamn ocean. Yeah. The middle of the goddamn ocean. Like, okay. Then we get, before she does that though, we get the meteor coming down. Everybody sees it, except them on the boat, which is the wizard, which is probably going to end up turning out to be Gandalf. But you don't find that out in the first season, from what I understand. Then Elrond is told he's going to well, you know, this is before the meteor. As I said, I'm going to skip over bits. He's told he's going to be working with and going with Celebrimbor, who comes in looking like fucking Nanny McPhee with his bleeding night dress on. But basically, where did it end? It didn't end with Galadriel jumping into the water. No, it didn't end with... She jumps into the fucking ocean. Now she's in the middle of the ocean on her own. The middle of the goddamn ocean. So, good luck with that. It ends with Elnor walking up and finding the wizard in the middle of the crater. And that's where it ends. Dialogue in this was god awful. A lot of the visuals were so telling that it was on those volume screens. Some of it here and there was actually okay. You know, there's a scene where Galadriel is in... It's actually the scene where she's told to lay down her sword. She's looking at trees with carvings of the elves they've lost, including her brother. Whatever way they done that scene, that actually looked decent. But the majority of the rest of it just looked horrible. Like, as I said, you can tell it's on the screen. By the way, the very first shot with her brother, well, it's not the very first shot, but when she's talking to her brother, she's a kid when she's talking to the brother, he goes walking, you get that very first promotional image they put out, remember, where you saw someone standing in a field with the two trees out in the back, and that's pretty much the opening shot of the show. The dialogue is horrible, the acting is terrible. Morfydd Clark is terrible as Galadriel. The dude playing Elrond is super feminine at times, I should say. Don Lemon down here, Don Lemon Elf, is just a fucking one note. His love interest, whatever the hell she's called, you know, nothing about her is interesting. You know, you couldn't care less about this person. All the hobbits are just stupid. Like, they're literally doing nothing. The one thing I will say for this show, I would love to be the composer for this show, for the simple reason he must have got paid some money, or her, whatever, whoever composed it, because there is not a goddamn scene in this program without music. Not one. Every single scene has music. And I don't mean like the music stops and then starts a new bit. It's constant until almost the very end. It stops for a brief minute and then stops again for a brief minute. But every actual scene is filled with music. So he must have got paid something decent. So the second episode is up as well, so I'll give that a check and I'll review that. That'll probably be up on Saturday maybe. So I shall leave it there for this one. It's gone longer than I expected. But watching it right after watching Fellowship of the Rings, it's worlds apart. You would not think they were the same universe. Probably because they're not. Alright. Cheers. Catch you in the next one.